game's up for Novak Djokovic, deported from Australia after losing his court case. He flew out of Melbourne Airport after judges said the government could cancel his visa over his refusal to be vaccinated against COVID. As Serbia says he's the victim of a witch hunt, we'll have the latest. Also coming up, Boris Johnson is accused by Labour of presiding over industrial-scale partying in Downing Street. A British man who took 4 people hostage at a Texas synagogue has been killed after a 10-hour standoff. And another England batting collapse as they lose the 5th and final Ashes test. Good afternoon. Novak Djokovic has been deported from Australia after losing his legal challenge to the cancelling of his visa. A panel of judges upheld the Australian government's decision. They said that his refusal to be vaccinated against COVID made him a threat to public health. The Serbian Prime Minister has accused Australia of a witch hunt. From Melbourne, Shaima Khalil reports.
He's used to winning on court, but today he was defeated in it. The world #1 men's tennis player lost his last-ditch battle to stay in the country and was forced out of Australia.
The amended application be dismissed with
3
costs.
judges upheld the government's decision to cancel his visa. The immigration minister had argued that the unvaccinated tennis star's presence here could bolster anti-vaccination sentiment. In his statement, the world #1 said, "I will now take time to rest and recuperate before making any further comments. I'm extremely disappointed with the court ruling to dismiss my application." Outside the court, many of his fans were still in shock, and emotions were high.
It's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. How is his first visa being... How did the first court ruling rule in his favour, but now it ruled against him? Why?
He had an exemption to come here and play tennis. He was allowed to come here, and that's what he should be doing.
It's a political stunt.
And Serbia's president was even more indignant.
He came there with medical exemption proposal, and then you were mistreating him for 10 days. Why did you do it? And then doing that witch's hunt campaign against him. And that is something that no one can understand.
This was a high-stakes court battle for both sides. The government has been publicly embarrassed by its mishandling of the controversy, while the player was desperate to avoid forfeiting the chance to compete for his record-breaking 21st Grand Slam title.
After being accompanied to the airport by federal police officers, Novak Djokovic boarded a plane to Dubai, ending a saga that has bruised the country, the player, and the Australian Open. Shaima Khalil, BBC News, Melbourne.
The Labour leader says that Boris Johnson has presided over industrial-scale partying in Downing Street and renewed his call for the Prime Minister to resign. So Keir Starmer said there was no need to wait for the report into a series of alleged rule-breaking events. The Conservative Party chairman said today that the culture in Number 10 should be addressed. Here's our political correspondent, Nick Hurdley.
A Prime Minister under pressure over what went on in here. Were COVID rules broken in Downing Street? How often did staff drink late into the night while the country was locked down? And can Boris Johnson survive?
If she comes back and says...
Labour's leader has made his mind up.
I think it's pretty obvious what's happened. There's industrial-scale partying that's been going on at Downing Street. Not much of it is really denied, and I think that the public have made up their mind. I think the facts speak for themselves. I think the Prime Minister broke the law. I think he then lied about what had happened.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise.
The Prime Minister has admitted he attended one drinks gathering at a time when socialising was extremely limited. That left many of his MPs furious. This woman, Sue Gray, is looking into allegations spanning almost a year. Her report is expected soon. But ministers are already suggesting it's the culture, not the man at the top, that needs to change.
The culture in Downing Street does need to be addressed, and I think it's absolutely essential that when the Prime Minister responds to the Sue Gray report, and he is committed to doing that in Parliament, that he addresses that culture. I know from many conversations I've had with the Prime Minister, he's in absolutely no doubt that he should and will take responsibility.
But many Tory MPs are worried about the man at the top. Former Minister Tim Lawton is the sixth to say the Prime Minister should go, tweeting, "I have regretfully come to the conclusion that Boris Johnson's position is now untenable. Others are angry in private." Grimsby voted Conservative for the first time in decades in the last election. So has this row changed minds on Boris Johnson?
I think the way they just think it's okay to do what they like. I think the whole thing has just made me feel like it's time to go. It's time for a change.
What he did was wrong, but I think he's done a lot of good things as well.
I think it's disgusting. Especially when you come to a town like Grimsby. You know, it's been tough. It's been really tough.
Everybody make a mistake. It's not a big deal.
The next week could be crucial in deciding if that happens. MPs will return to Parliament after judging the mood in the country, and the report on parties in Downing Street is set to be published. Will the Prime Minister be able to move on, or is the clock ticking on Boris Johnson's premiership? Nick Earley, BBC News.
Meanwhile, the Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries has suggested that the days of the BBC licence fee are numbered in a tweet about the present charter, which runs until 2027 being the last. Our media correspondent David Silito is here in the studio. What exactly did she say, David?
Tweet this morning, the words, "This licence fee announcement will be the last. The days of the elderly being threatened with prison sentences and bailiffs knocking on doors are over." Essentially, two bits of information in this. The first one, this licence fee announcement, essentially endorsing a story today in the Mail on Sunday, suggesting that the BBC licence fee is going to be frozen for the next 2 years, and then small increases after that, which will be further hefty cuts to the BBC's funding. But of course, the wider issue about the licence fee itself, there have been many questions about how long it will last. The current charter goes to the end of 2027. Could the BBC, for instance, be run like Netflix on a subscription? The question there is, well, what about all the millions who watch on free-to-air TV and free-to-air radio? You'd have to have big changes. Subscription BBC will be very different. And of course, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, was asked about this in Question Time only last week. He certainly didn't suggest that he was in favour at the moment of getting rid of the licence fee, and described the BBC as a great national institution at the time.
David, thank you. David Silito, our media correspondent. Now to the latest coronavirus data, which today does not include figures from Scotland. That's due to a technical issue. Elsewhere, there were 70,924 new infections in the latest 24-hour period. That means an average of nearly 108,000 new cases per day in the last week. Another 88 deaths were reported of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. On average, in the past week, there were 262 deaths a day. Vaccinations are continuing at a slower pace. On average, in the last week, nearly 124,000 people per day had a booster jab. 63.3% of the population aged 12 or over have now had 3 doses of a vaccine. A man who took 4 people hostage at a synagogue in Texas and held them for 10 hours was a British citizen, the Foreign Office has confirmed. The 4 hostages were freed. The hostage taker died at the scene. Reports suggest that he was demanding the release of a woman imprisoned in the US after being convicted of terror offences. Sophie Long reports.
More than 10 hours after their ordeal began, this is the moment you can see the 3 final hostages running for their lives. A successful but nonetheless terrifying end to the delicate day-long operation. The man who claimed to have a gun and a bomb had disrupted a peaceful morning service being streamed from the congregation Beth Israel in Dallas. You may be able to hear his British accent.
Are you listening? I am going to die.
Initially, 4 people were taken hostage, including the rabbi. 6 hours later, one was released unharmed. For the others, the ordeal would continue until the SWAT team stormed the building.
They rescued the 3 hostages, and the subject is deceased.
People came here, a place of worship, to pray. But once again in America, a moment of peace became a moment of profound pain. As the people who were trapped, terrified, try to come to terms with what happened.
The now deceased hostage taker was heard ranting about religion and demanding the release of a Pakistani neuroscientist with suspected links to Al-Qaeda in prison in Texas for trying to kill US military personnel in Afghanistan. Sophie Long, BBC News, Dallas.
Communications with Tonga remain limited in the wake of an underwater volcano erupting in the South Pacific, which appears to have covered much of the island nation in a layer of ash. The tsunami triggered by the eruption caused flooding on parts of the US West Coast and Japan. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
From high up in space, weather satellites caught the moment the huge underwater volcano let loose, sending a cloud of ash and rock 20 kilometres high and at least 500 kilometres wide. That's an ash cloud that could stretch from London to Edinburgh. Somewhere beneath it is the tiny island kingdom of Tonga. The first thing to hit the island was the shockwave. Then came the rushing waters of a tsunami, smashing into seawalls and flooding what here appears to be a church. Next, day turned to night as the ash began to fall. These pictures are reportedly from Saturday afternoon, as people were trying to flee from the coast. In New Zealand, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said communication with Tonga remains difficult.
Shops along the coast have been damaged and a significant clean-up will be needed. Nuku'alofa is covered in thick film of volcanic dust, but otherwise conditions are calm and stable.
The Hunga Tonga Hunga Ha'apai volcano has been active since mid-December, but Saturday's huge eruption took experts by surprise.
I would expect the activity to continue for a while yet. I'm not necessarily expecting it to get any bigger, but it could conceivably continue on at a similar scale.
The eruption sent a tsunami wave right across the Pacific Ocean. In New Zealand, the tsunami caused serious damage, smashing boats against each other and causing some to sink. But tonight, the main concern remains Tonga. Until the ash cloud clears and New Zealand and Australia can begin sending military flights, it remains very unclear how bad the situation on the island really is. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Tokyo.
Time now for the sport with Carthy. Hello, Carthy.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you very much. England's men's cricketers have ended what has been a miserable Ashes series with defeat in the final test, leaving Australia with a 4-0 series victory. England lost 9 wickets in one session today on their way to being bowled out for 124 on day 3. Australia had already retained the famous urn, but they added a 146-run victory in the final Ashes test for good measure, as Joe Wilson reports.
Australia's cricketers summoned the spirit to celebrate in Hobart, but this seemed like their effortless Ashes. It was a contest when England were bowling. Mark Wood took 6 wickets. It meant that England could win the 5th Test match if they scored 271. And they got to 68 without losing a wicket. Then the collapse, which former captain Alistair Cook called rock bottom. Australia's bowlers were relentless. Cameron Green is a great discovery. COVID restrictions, lack of preparations, all relevant, but 124 all out? Well, not much Joe Root could do with the delivery, which barely bounced. But England's emerging players just aren't getting better.
Beautifully bowled.
And the art and the graft of test match batting, gone.
That is it. England have been bowled out.
It's tough to watch. How draining to be England's captain.
We're going through a real tough stage as a group of players, and the performance haven't been good enough. But I would love the opportunity to try and turn things around, and for us to start putting in performances that you'd expect from an English Test team.
Let's remember England rarely prosper down under, but Australia's captain began the series with a smile, and he's never stopped. In the Ashes tradition, that just can't be right. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Everton have sacked their manager Rafael Benitez this afternoon. They had won only one of their last 13 league games, and travelling fans made their feelings known during their defeat to Norwich yesterday. His appointment last summer had been controversial due to his previous success with City rivals Liverpool. who had a 3-0 win over Brentford this afternoon. Fabinho, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and Takumi Minamino scored the goals that moved Liverpool up to second place in the Premier League. A hat-trick from Jack Harrison gave Leeds a 3-2 victory at West Ham. The win eases Leeds away from the relegation zone and above Everton into 15th. The Masters snooker final is proving to be an intriguingly tight encounter so far. Neil Robertson last won this title a decade ago. Robertson's century break in the third frame has helped him to a 5-3 lead over Barry Hawkins. There's more on the BBC Sport website, including the latest from England's match against the world champions New Zealand in the Netball Quad Series and results from Rugby Union's European Champions Cup. Mishal.
Kathy, thank you. That's it from us for now. We're back with the late news at 10 now on BBC One. It's time for the news wherever you are. Goodbye.